In this Warmaster battle report, the Wood Elves take on the Dogs of War in an upcoming tournament scenario. Armies are selected to 2,000 points. This scenario is called Hold the Ground. The battlefield is 180 centimeters long by 120 centimeters wide. The scenery is placed on the board in an arrangement typical of a UK tournament. And this scenario does require a good mix of terrain types evenly spaced around the board. The game will last for 2.5 hours, or until one army is forced to withdraw. Players will be fighting for possession of objective markers which are placed on the board amongst scenery pieces. And at the end of the game, whoever has scored the most victory points is the winner. On this battlefield there are 3 hills. Hills are open terrain and grant infantry or artillery defended status. There are also 3 woods. Woods are dense terrain and can only be entered by infantry and grant defended status. There is 1 field which cannot be entered by artillery and denies charging units their charge bonus. There is 1 marsh which is dense terrain, can only be entered by infantry and grants them defended status. There is a village which is dense terrain and can be entered by all units. It also grants infantry defended status. Finally, there is 1 statue which is an impassable feature. Armies will deploy up to 20 centimeters onto the board from the long edges. Before determining which side of the board they will deploy from, both players have to place objective markers. 1 marker goes dead center of the board, and each player then places 1 marker in their own half and 1 marker in their opponent's half. The players' objectives can't be within the deployment zones and have to be 30 centimeters from each other, and inside a terrain piece. At the end of the game, each objective marker controlled by a player is worth an additional 200 victory points. Before deployment, both players also take 3 strategy cards. These are chosen at random and will have either a minor positive or minor negative effect upon the game. Each player takes 1 of each card type. The Wood Elf player plays their terrain card on the village. The village now contains a haunted house, so any troops within 10 centimeters of the village suffer a -1 command penalty. Meanwhile, the Dogs of War player plays a terrain card on a wood, turning it into Morning Wood, which has no effect. The first army to take to the field are the Wood Elves. This Wood Elf army features a lot of Dryad infantry and also Way Watchers. These units will be very good at capturing objective markers within terrain. There is also a strong strike force of Wild Rider cavalry, some flyers, 2 wizards and a terror-causing treeman character. With a scouting value of 21, the Wood Elves easily win the scouting role and deploy their scouts first. 4 units of Dryads take up position on the right flank of the army. They are accompanied by the Treeman Ancient, and their role will be to capture the nearby objective. Next, 2 units of Warhawks deploy on the left flank of the army, whilst the Way Watchers will be held off the board, awaiting their chance to ambush. The second army are the Dogs of War. My Dogs of War army is very infantry heavy, and we will be trying out the experimental rules for pikemen this game. I have artillery, flyers, a terror-causing character, 2 wizards, and a strike force of cavalry. And my infantry's weight of numbers should be enough to evict the Wood Elves from their defendable terrain. The Dogs of War deploy in a long line in their deployment zone, readying their shovels to start claiming the buried treasure. On the right flank I deploy 2 units of crossbowmen in line, and they are supported by 2 units of swordsmen in line. The birdmen of Katrazar wait at the rear of the army, waiting to swoop down on an unguarded objective, whilst Asanil the Dragonlord with his Sword of Might commands them. The right flank also has a wizard to support them with spells. In the centre we have 2 units of ogres deployed in column, and they will protect the flanks of the pikemen units, of which we have 4. This formation should be strong against enemy cavalry. We also deploy 2 more units of swordsmen to protect the flanks of the 2nd Pike Brigade. At the rear of the army we have 2 units of knights as a mobile strike force, and they are brigaded with 2 units of light cavalry, who will protect them from enemy missile fire. On our left flank we deploy the general, and he is accompanied by the paymaster on his pay wagon, and the army's 2nd wizard. On the extreme left we deploy our remaining 2 units of crossbowmen in column, and they are protecting the flanks of the Gallophagon artillery brigade, which will move forwards to occupy the haunted village. Army breakpoint is 11. The Wood Elves now deploy their remaining force. On the left are 2 units of Glade Guard in line formation. Next to them are 4 more units of Dryads in column. At the rear are 4 units of Wild Riders. And commanding these brigades are 2 Spellweaver Wizards. In the centre, occupying the field, are 2 more units of Glade Guard archers in line formation, and there is a stand of war dancers added to one of these units. The general also takes up a central position to best command the army. The Wood Elves have deployed with a strong centralised force to best contest their nearest objectives. And like the Dogs of War, the Wood Elf cavalry waits in the rear, ready to react to any emerging threats. The Wood Elves aim to move forward their infantry brigades quickly and take advantage of the defendable terrain. Their breakpoint is 10. Both armies are now deployed for battle, and both players will now decide which objectives they're going to try and capture. To control an objective, a player must have a unit within 5 cm of it, and no enemy units within 5 cm of it. Confused units cannot claim objectives. Flying units cannot claim objectives, but can contest them. The objective markers cannot be moved during the battle, so the fighting will be fiercest around the objective locations. Having lost the scouting role, the Dogs of War must move first. On the right flank, the crossbowmen and swordsmen brigade is ordered forwards to capture the objective. In the centre, the pikemen brigades and their accompanying infantry are ordered forwards as well, although the ogres insist on finishing their breakfast first, which slows their brigade down. On the left flank, the crossbowmen and artillery brigade cautiously enters the haunted village. They capture their objective, but unnerved by the strange sounds coming from the abandoned houses, they refuse to move further. At the rear of the army, the cavalry brigade and the birdmen wait in reserve. So in the first turn, the Dogs of War have made a cautious advance, keeping their battle line as straight as possible and securing 2 objectives. Characters take up position ahead of the army and await the Wood Elves' reaction. On the Wood Elf right flank, the Dryad Brigade moves up and captures an objective in the nearby woods. And on the left flank, the Glade Guard Brigade takes up a defendable position on the hill, capturing their objective in the process. In the centre of the battlefield, another Glade Guard Brigade and their accompanying war dancers take up a defended position inside the central wood, out of sight of the enemy. From here they can also control the central objective. The remaining Wood Elf units bide their time, refusing to advance forwards with the rest of the army. So at the end of their first turn, both armies have claimed the 2 objectives in their own table half, with the Wood Elves making a bold move in the centre to claim the central objective as well. In their second turn, the Dogs of War units on the right flank advance again, with infantry moving ahead of their objective on the hill and cavalry forming up in the open ground beside them. In the centre, the pike brigades and their accompanying infantry switch positions, with the pikes and swordsmen advancing into the woods claimed by the Glade Guard to contest the central objective. Whilst on the left flank, still frightened by the screams coming from the haunted house, the artillery brigade and its infantry tiptoe to the edge of the village, giving the cannon line of sight. However, the Dogs of War missile units are still out of range this turn, and their wizard spells have no effect on the Wood Elves. At the start of their second turn, the Wood Elves spring an ambush, with a unit of Way Watchers appearing in the haunted village behind the artillery brigade. The mercenaries clutch at their holy symbols, and begin to think that maybe the unearthly screams they heard was simply elven trickery all along. The Wood Elves then move a brigade of 3 Dryad units from their right flank to reinforce the centre. The Glade Guard and War Dancers in the central wood attempt to manoeuvre out of range of the pikemen, but fail their order, leaving themselves within charge range. On the elven left, a brigade of 4 Dryad units march all the way from the centre of the board to take up a defendable position within a wood, whilst behind them, Glade Guard dig into their defendable position on the hill. The 2 Warhawk Rider units fly all the way to land beside the artillery brigade in the haunted village. With their superior mobility, the Wood Elves are now starting to threaten the flanks of the Dogs of War army. And the Wood Elves now decide to unleash their shooting and magic to thin out the enemy lines. The Warhawk Riders and Way Watchers inflict 5 hits on the defended crossbowmen in the village, whereas the Glade Guard can only manage a single hit on the swordsmen in the woods. A Spellweaver then unleashes her Ring of Magic to cast the Fury of the Forest. 8 Dogs of War units are struck by the spell, each taking 3 attacks. However, after all the dice are rolled, none of the Dogs of War units actually lose a stand. At the end of the shooting phase, we work out the drive backs, and unsurprisingly the crossbowmen are driven back out of the village and confused. However, none of the units that were struck by the Fury of the Forest spell are driven back, leaving the Wood Elves slightly underwhelmed by their magical powers. So at the end of turn 2, the Wood Elves have drawn first blood by taking a stand of crossbowmen, and the Dogs of War left flank is now looking quite vulnerable. At the start of their third turn, the Dogs of War play a character card on their Paymaster. For this turn, the Paymaster is a dedicated follower of fashion, which has no effect, but does prevent the Wood Elves playing their own character card upon him this turn. A unit of pikemen and a unit of swordsmen now use their initiative to charge a unit of Glade Guard that they can just see through the wood. The Wood Elves stand and shoot and score a hit on the swordsmen. The birdmen then home back towards a character and are ordered to fly to the extreme left of the battlefield, where they can now counteract the actions of the Warhawks. On the right flank, the cavalry brigade is unwilling to advance into initiative range of the Dryads lurking in the trees, so they hold back and protect the flank of the infantry on the hill. Despite using his Paywagon upgrade to increase his command to 9 for this turn, the Paymaster fails to get the ogres and pikemen moving, and they can only manage a half-paced move forwards. Luckily, one of the Dogs of War wizards manages to order a unit of swordsmen up through the woods and into support of the combat. But the general fails to get the artillery brigade to leave the haunted village, exposing them to the Wood Elves next turn. In combat, the pikemen and swordsmen manage to just beat the Glade Guard and their War Dancers, thanks to the supporting swordsmen stands. The Dogs of War units then pursue and manage to kill off 2 stands of Glade Guard for the loss of a pikeman and a swordsman stand. They then fall back in good order to redress their battle line. In doing so, they capture the central objective and prevent the Wood Elves from contesting it. The Wood Elves begin turn 3 with a unit of Warhawks making an initiative charge into the flank of the Galloper guns. As the Warhawks have to maximise frontage, they end up in the forward line of sight of the Galloper guns, which are allowed to stand and shoot. They score 2 hits on the Warhawks. In the centre, the damaged Glade Guard unit and their War Dancers retreats to the safety of the rear of the wood. The brigade of 3 Dryad units attempts to charge into the waiting pikemen on the objective, but the order fails. So instead, the undamaged unit of Glade Guard in the central wood leaves the wood and forms a line in front of the other infantry. On the Wood Elf left, their cavalry brigade now advances between the archers on the hill and the Dryads in the wood. The Dryads don't wish to leave their wood and expose themselves to the threat of a flank charge from the enemy cavalry. So on this side of the battlefield, a no man's land has developed, with neither side willing to advance into enemy territory. On the opposite end of the battlefield, the Wood Elves appear dominant, with the Warhawks invading the village to take out the artillery and contest the objective. Whilst in the centre of the battlefield, on the objective, the Dogs of War have the strong position. In the shooting phase, the Treeman Ancient manages to cast Tree Singing onto the archers in front of the Dryads. The archers now count as defended, so this will protect them from the inevitable charge of the enemy pikemen next turn. The Glade Guard on the hill manage to kill off a stand of swordsmen from the brigade in the woods and drive them back, whilst the damaged unit of crossbowmen once again find themselves the target of elven archery and are driven back. In the combat phase, the Dogs of War play a combat strategy card on the Warhawks. One of the Warhawks is a playful beast and will lose its charge bonus attacks for this turn. However, this is not enough to save the Galloper guns, and they are quickly cut down by the flying foe. However, they do take a stand of Warhawks in revenge. The Warhawks then advance into the second unit of Galloper guns. The guns stand and shoot with grape shot, and the combat results in a draw, although the artillery does lose one of its stands. The remaining Galloper gun holds position while the Warhawks fall back in good order towards the objective. Turn 4 begins with the Wood Elf player playing a character strategy card on the Dogs of War hero. This turn the hero has become indecisive and will blunder his order on the roll of any double. In the centre, 2 units of pikemen use their initiative to charge into the Glade Guard that are defended from the Tree Singing spell. The Wood Elves stand and shoot, causing an unsaved hit on both units. A unit of swordsmen and a unit of ogres also have line of sight to the edges of the Glade Guard, so these units can make initiative charges as well. In a somewhat rash action on the Dogs of War right flank, the light cavalry units decide to break the deadlock in no man's land and charge into the defended Glade Guard on the hill. The Glade Guards stand and shoot at their attackers, and their deadly accurate archery cuts down a stand of light cavalry before they see combat. In the Dogs of War centre, the unengaged pikemen brigade form up on the objective, accompanied by the ogres and 2 stands of crossbowmen. Meanwhile, Asanil the Dragon Lord swoops across the battlefield and joins the ogres, who are engaged in combat with the Glade Guard. While on the right, the heavy cavalry fall back to form line with the infantry on the hill. In the haunted village, the wizards order the remaining Galloper gun and its accompanying crossbows to turn around and face the Warhawks. In the shooting phase, the artillery and crossbows succeed in driving the Warhawks back far enough so that the Wood Elves no longer have line of sight through the village. The Dogs of War wizards then attempt to cast Voice of Command onto the Birdmen in order to send them charging into the flank of the other Warhawk units, but the Wood Elves' Dispel Scroll prevents this. In combat, the defended Glade Guard on the hill easily repel the light cavalry for no losses. The elves fall back in good order, and the Dogs of War cavalry find itself stuck in the open, awaiting a flank charge from the Wild Riders next turn. In the centre, the Dogs of War units barely managed to win combat against the defended Glade Guard, mainly thanks to the intervention of the terror-causing character. The Glade Guards and their supporting Dryads then retreat, whilst the pikemen and swordsmen get to pursue them. However, the ogres can now no longer pursue into base contact with the retreating enemy, as the pikemen's awkward base size disrupts the battle line. Instead, the ogres have to fall back with the accompanying character, and they now join the second line of infantry. Meanwhile, the pikemen and swordsmen who can pursue manage to finish off the Glade Guard unit and take a stand from the Dryads in support. Helped in part by their new improved 5+ armour save, the pikemen units survive the second round of combat and force the Dryads to retreat once more. The pikemen and swordsmen then pursue once again, locking the Dryads into combat. And this also brings a third unit of Dryads, who are in column, into combat as well, as they're now in a supporting position. As the combat has been fought over 2 rounds, it will now continue into the Wood Elves' turn. The Wood Elves now need to respond to the Dogs of War's strong push through the centre, and take advantage of the Dogs of War error on their right. Both armies still controlled 2 objectives, with the Haunted Village contested. In Wood Elf turn 4, a unit of Wild Riders uses their initiative to charge the flank of the Dogs of War light cavalry, who are exposed on the hill. The unit of 3 Warhawk Riders homes back towards a Spellweaver, threatening both the artillery and the flank of the ogres in the process. The Wood Elf General orders a second unit of Wild Riders to charge the flank of the second unit of Dogs of War light cavalry. He also attempts to order 2 units of Dryads to move out of the woods on the Wood Elf left and into the woods in the centre of the board. However, the second order to the Dryads fails and they're left stuck in no man's land. In the shooting phase, a Spellweaver manages to cast Call of the Hunt on the surviving stand of Glade Guard and their War Dancers, who manage to flank charge the swordsmen who are engaged in combat with the Dryads in the centre of the board. The Warhawk Riders near the Haunted Village use their bowfire to destroy the remaining stand of Galloper guns. In the close combat phase, on the Wood Elf left, the Wild Riders plough through the Dogs of War light cavalry and destroy both units for minimal losses. The Wild Riders then fall back in good order onto the hill. While in the centre, the Dogs of War lose both units of pikemen and the unit of swordsmen to the Wood Elf countercharge, although the Dryads also take heavy losses. The victorious Wood Elf infantry units then fall back in good order, with the Glade Guard taking up a flanking position within the central wood. At the start of their 5th turn, the Dogs of War heavy cavalry use their initiative to charge the exposed flanks of the Dryads in the open ground. As the first charging unit completely covers the flank of the target Dryad unit, the second unit of Knights is allowed to make a corner-to-corner contact charge, as they still have line of sight to the Dryads. In the centre, the Ogres and a unit of pikemen use their initiative to charge the Dryads. On the Dogs of War left, the Birdmen home back towards a character and are then ordered to fly to the rear of the Wood Elf army and contest an objective held by Dryads in a wood. A wizard attempts to order the crossbowmen in the Haunted Village, but the negative effects of the dense terrain, the nearby enemy and the haunted house cause the order to fail. In the centre, the Ogres and pikemen hold position on the objective, whilst a unit of 2 swordsmen stands is ordered to charge the flank of the Glade Guard lurking in the woods. Characters then change position, with the Paymaster on his pay wagon joining the combat between the Knights and the Dryads. Asanil the Dragon Lord joins the Ogres fighting the Dryads in the centre, and then in the magic phase a wizard casts Voice of Command on a unit of 2 crossbowmen stands, moving them up into a supporting position with the Ogres. We then move on to the combat phase, with the Dogs of War hoping to destroy enough Elven units this turn to score some victory points. The Dogs of War also need to remove the Glade Guard stands from the central wood in order to secure the central objective. On the right, the combat between the Dryads and the Knights is very decisive, with both Dryads being wiped out by the charging Knights for no loss. The Knights then form up in line formation, awaiting the inevitable countercharge of the enemy cavalry. In the centre, the swordsmen fighting the Glade Guards in the wood just manage to beat them by a single point, forcing them out of their defended position and pursuing them. In the following round, they cut down one stand of Glade Guard without sustaining any losses themselves. The swordsmen pursue the elves again, locking them into combat for next turn. On the left, the ogres and pikemen, with the support of the crossbowmen and the assistance of the Dragon Lord, manage to defeat the Dryads over 2 rounds of combat, killing off one unit entirely and reducing another unit to a single stand. The ogres also lose a stand in the combat, and then the pikemen decide to fall back in good order to protect the flanks of the engagement, which will continue next turn. The pursuing ogres also contact a spellweaver, who is forced to join another friendly unit within 30 centimeters, in this case the Warhawks. With the end of the battle now approaching, the Dogs of War will take no more turns. Have they done enough damage to the Wood Elf infantry to secure victory, or do the Wood Elves still have a few tricks up their sleeve? Wood Elf turn 5 begins with 3 units of Wild Riders making initiative charges into the Dogs of War Knights. A unit of Warhawks then homes back towards the Spellweaver, joining the second unit of Warhawks. However, the Spellweaver's order to get the Warhawks to charge into combat fails. The tricksy Wood Elves then pull off a fantastic tactical move, with the Wood Elf General ordering in the second unit of Way Watchers to ambush behind the swordsmen and ogres on the central objective. This ensures that the Wood Elves will contest the central objective at the end of the game. Characters then move position, with the Treeman Ancient joining the combat with the Wild Riders against the Knights. In the magic phase, a Spellweaver successfully casts Call of the Hunt upon a unit of Warhawks, and they get a flank charge against the pikemen in the centre. With only one objective held by both armies, it's going to be down to close combat to determine the victor in this game. Can the Dogs of War hold out against the Elven attacks this turn, or will they be forced to rout? In melee, the Wood Elves begin their turn poorly, with the Warhawks failing to kill off the pikemen guarding the central objective. The desperate clash between swordsmen and Glade Guard in the wood ends with both sides losing a stand, which wipes the Glade Guard out. On the Wood Elf right, in a desperate move, the Wood Elves place a Potion of Strength on the last remaining Dryad unit fighting the Ogres and the Dragon. This attempt to destroy a second stand of Ogres fails, and the Dryads are cut down in short order. The Dogs of War units then reform to face the oncoming Wood Elves. In the final action of the game, the epic cavalry clash on the Wood Elf left is resolved. The Treeman Ancient's terror is a powerful force multiplier, and this results in the Wood Elves easily defeating the Knights. The Knights retreat and are pursued by their Fey foes, but in the second round the Knights' armour holds, and although one unit is wiped out, the second unit of Knights survives with a single stand, saving the character. The Elves also lose 2 stands from a unit of Wild Riders. The time limit for the game then expires, and both players now calculate their victory points to determine the winner. This has been a very brutal and bloody battle, with both sides sustaining heavy losses, although neither side reached its army breakpoint. The Dogs of War casualties amount to 2 units of Galloper guns, 2 units of light cavalry, 2 units of pikes, 1 unit of swordsmen, 1 unit of knights, half a unit of swordsmen, and half a unit of knights. The Wood Elf casualties amount to 5 units of Dryads, 2 units of Glade Guard plus a stand of War Dancers, and half a unit of Wild Riders. The objective in woods on the Wood Elf right is contested, so scores nothing. The objective on the Wood Elf left on the hill is captured by Wood Elves and scores them 200 points. The objective in the Haunted Village is contested and scores nothing. The objective on the Dogs of War right on the hill is captured by Dogs of War and scores them 200 points. And the objective in the centre of the board is also contested by the Tricksy Way Watchers and scores nothing. So in this game, the clever use of Way Watchers on the final turn was key to securing the Wood Elves' victory. If you enjoyed this battle report, then remember you can purchase your own objective markers direct from Cromarty Forge. And in this game we were able to showcase painted examples of these objective markers. And if you'd like to try this scenario for yourselves, you can download the rules pack for Warmaster 2 tournament from the Files tab on the Warmaster Facebook page, and this includes a copy of the strategy cards. And I will include a link below.